It's so wonderful to have you here today, to those of you that are in the room, but also those of you that are watching us from outside of the room. And thank you for taking part in this important, critical conversation. I think many of us know this year there is a special energy around COP30. And because it takes place in Belém, Brazil, a democratic country, and because it is home to one of the critical lungs of our planet, the Amazon. It's also happening at a time of significant global geopolitical shifts that will have lasting implications for all of us. No one understands the urgency and opportunity of this moment more than civil society and movement organizations and leaders who are working on the front lines with communities experiencing the direct impacts of climate change and climate inaction. As with other COPs, this year it will be movements, civil society leaders, grassroots leaders, indigenous leaders who will help shape the agenda, ensuring that commitments on issues like forest protection, indigenous land rights, loss and damage aren't just made, but that they are followed through. And we know there is enormous amount of work that goes through before, during, and beyond the COP sessions. So that's what we're here today to talk about. During the session, we're hoping to discuss the road to and beyond, the decades beyond, Belém through the lens of grassroots movement and civil society leadership. We'll hear from our amazing, incredible panelists about their priorities and how they're organizing before, during, and after COP to make sure we as humanity uphold our responsibility to our planet and to each other, even when our leaders are backsliding. So I hope each of us engages in this discussion from a place of our own power and our own agency, and think about what we can do to support and enable the visions and priorities we'll hear about today from communities. And with that, let me briefly introduce you to this inspiring group of leaders, and I'll go in order. We have with us Mike Davis, who is the CEO of Global Witness, where he's been leading a bold strategic shift to challenge the power of big polluters and elevate the voices of those most impacted by climate breakdown. With over 2 decades at the organization, Mike has led groundbreaking investigations and campaigns from Myanmar to Sub-Saharan Africa, exposing corruption and driving accountability in the climate and extractive space. Thank you, Mike. We also have Daniela Orofino, Executive Director of Amazônia de Pé, a powerful Brazilian movement protecting the Amazon and its people through grassroots organization and digital advocacy, with members of over 300 coalition members and thousands of people organized. With over 12 years of experience in campaigning and political strategy, Daniela brings deep expertise in building coalitions and mobilizing people across a country. Thank you, Daniela. We also have with us today Nonette Royo, Executive Director of the Tenure Facility. Nonette has spent more than 3 decades advancing indigenous land rights across the world's tropical forests. A lawyer by training, she's helped scale Tenure Facility into a global philanthropic force supporting indigenous and local communities in over 20 countries. And last but not least, we have Archana Soreng, who is an indigenous youth leader from India and a former member of the UN Secretary General's Youth Advisory Group on Climate Change, where she championed indigenous rights and youth leadership. She now works globally to ensure climate finance and philanthropy are accessible to indigenous communities and youth leaders. She's also a 2024 Skoll World Forum Fellow. Can we give our panelists a hand to start? So, we often talk about COP as this big event, but there's enormous amount of work, as we said earlier, that goes into getting there. And each of you is deeply involved in that work, in preparing communities for that work. So I would love to start by talking about that, right? How are you preparing communities, both in terms of strategies and priorities and focus areas, and how are you ensuring people, when they get there, are ready and able to participate fully? And Daniela, because it is happening in your home turf, Brazil, we're going to have to start with you here. If you can just talk to us about how Amazônia de Pé, as well as grassroots group movements in Brazil, are preparing for this moment.
Perfect. Thank you, Solomé. It's really nice to be here with you. My name is Daniela. And as Solomé has said, I'm from Brazil, the country that will host COP30 this year. It's a really big responsibility for civil society in Brazil, hosting the conference. We are excited. As Solomé has said, we are a democratic country, we are not a petrostate, and Brazil has a really strong civil society that has been working a lot since we've been nominated the country that will host the conference. The organizations in the country and the social movements have come together and united to create a People Summit that will happen in the same time as the conference, such as we did in Rio 92 when we hosted the conference in 1992. The year that I was born, an important year in my life. And I think that we've been showing that grassroots movements need to work together with researchers, with academic organizations, with NGOs to push forward for public policies that protect the environment and the people, and push forward for social justice and climate justice. At Amazônia de Pé, we are a grassroots movement. We launched in 2022, and our main cause is the protection of the public forests that we have in the Amazon. I don't know if you guys know that, but the Amazon rainforest right now has 57 million hectares of public forests only in Brazil. It's bigger than Spain, this amount of land. It's a really, really big amount of land. And it's undesignated public forests, which means that it's forests owned by the Brazilian state that has not been designated to any kind of legal protection. So it's in these areas where we have the most, we have the highest rates of deforestation and illegal land grabbers. So Amazônia de Pé is pushing the Brazilian government to protect all the 57 million hectares of public forests by designating the protection to the people that care for the forest and historically have shown us that are responsible to keeping the forest standing, which is indigenous peoples, quilombolas peoples, African descendant people organized in Brazil, and local communities. I'm saying that because Amazônia de Pé put this as a target, but all social movements in Brazil understand COP30 as the road to COP30. We know that we are in a country where national politics impact globally. We are home of the Amazon, the majority of the Amazon, not the only home, of course, but the majority of the rainforest is in our country, and we know that protecting the Amazon impacts the whole world. So understanding that we have a big opportunity to push our governors, local governors, and our federal government to commit to concrete politics that can protect the Amazon in the long term. We believe that grassroots movements are crucial to that because building environmental policies in the backbone of the people is the best way to build strong policies that won't have backlashes in changes of governments and that won't change every 4 years. So grassroots movements are really important to create this vision in the country and to create public policies that will last independent of who's in power. And this is what we've been doing in Amazônia de Pé in collaboration with more than 300 organizations in the big coalition, and collaborating with the other coalitions that have been forming in the country to receive all of you in Brazil in November.
Thank you. Amazing. Mike, if we can come to you next.
Yes, thank you, Solomé, and thanks all for being here. It's almost exactly 13 years since a former teammate of mine in Cambodia was shot dead while investigating an illegal logging operation. There's a man called Chuk Vuti who'd become a grassroots leader. And this jolted us at Global Witness into considering more fully the global extent of threats and attacks on land and environmental defenders. And we began working with a network of partners to begin documenting threats, attacks, and killings, and we now publish these with our partners on an annual basis. And to give you an idea of what this looks like in hard statistical terms, for 2023, we found that there were 196 murders which we could verify globally. 43% of those killed were from indigenous communities. 25 of the deaths were in Brazil. And it's actually 1,400 killings of land and environmental defenders now since the signing of the Paris Agreement. Now, a lot of what we call land and environmental defenders, I have to admit that's our label, are ordinary people who are facing predatory grabs for their land and their forests, but in many cases they are actually defending climate-critical landscapes that all of us depend on. And what we've seen across the sequence of COP summits, perhaps particularly the past three, is that the voices of land and environmental defenders, including the indigenous communities, local communities, are not heard. Their agendas are not respected and heard and acted on. And meanwhile, the voices and agendas of large polluting industries that want to obstruct the progress at the COPs are. Something that we and a lot of other organizations have been working on together for the past 2 years is designing of a new potential initiative to afford greater recognition and protection to land and environmental defenders. It's called the Leaders Network for Environmental Activists and Defenders. I think some of those involved are in this room. And currently it's nearly 40 CSOs from around the world, civil society organizations, over 100 grassroots groups have fed into the process. And we also have support from a couple of UN agencies, 4 UN special rapporteurs, and currently 11 governments. One of those is the Brazilian government, and they are championing this idea, and they've committed to launch this lead initiative at COP30. And what we're hoping that will mean is that they will draw attention to this through the various ways they have at their disposal as COP president. There'll be a formal launch. We're hoping that the other 10 governments will publicly commit to backing this initiative, and that there'll then be some work at the COP to draw up a plan for a first lead summit, which will happen in 2026. Now, there's still quite a few months to go to Belém, so we and our partners are also doing a lot of work with 2 ministers in particular in the Brazilian government to see what they can do in the short term to ensure greater access for land and environmental defenders at the summit itself. So it's still quite early days, it's still quite formative, but potentially hugely exciting, and we would hope, amongst other things, a strong complement to the People's Summit that Daniela was just talking about.
Amazing. Thank you for that. And speaking of land defenders, Nonette, if we can come to you now to talk about some of the work that you've been doing and championing.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd just like to acknowledge the doers are
All
around here. I would really deeply be able to say that the support only matters if the doers are doing. So the chair of our board, Joan Carling, is here. The doers in the field, JTC, representatives of JTC are doing the conversations on money and where the commitments are for the pledge. So many, FPP, many others I cannot name. But I'm just going to express that they're LMV, okay? Leadership. Leadership from the bottom. Regardless of how much and whatever the risks are, they are taking the bullet, they're in the front lines, and they are guarding the last standing forests that we have. The crucial amount of land we need for 30 by 30 is in their hands. Leaders are not actually just names of individuals. These are the doers in the front line. We don't know their names. They are taking the bullet. That's so important, and the preparation for that is not just this year. Years, we know this. And consistent presencing and influencing. So the second part of this, for me, is the voice and the platforms. National platforms are being taken by all of us. And that is actually meaning brave and courageous partnerships with different levels of governments. They're not all allies, but there are some government units that they can work with, and they work with them, and they raise their voices on the national platform and bring it to the regional platforms and then the global platforms. We are there and heard now in the blue zones because of that. Yeah. Without that, how many were in the blue zones in the last COPs that we have attended? It's because of that, right? And so that to me is a very important part of the work. And the third is really the momentum. We have, 2 years ago, even before COP30, Why it's COP30 special is because it's the first summit in the Amazon, the first COP summit in the Amazon. The greatest number of indigenous peoples will be there ever, right? I can imagine there's a campsite now, right? Because everything's booked. And then it's the first minister of indigenous peoples in Brazil. These are all firsts, and it's very, very important for us to, the momentum getting to here is amazing. COP16, what did we accomplish in COP16? That was with the idea of creating the platform for COP30. We all know this. It's in the agenda. There's a parallel summit. Cúpula dos Povos. Sorry, but that is an important one. So the preparation in the lead up, it's crucial because it's only really the dinner, as you know, when you prepare a very big feast, as Ruka knows, the hard work is in the momentum, and it's just there. Thank you.
Thank you for that, absolutely. And that point of voices and what voices and whose voices are heard is critical in Archana. I know you have a lot to say on that when it comes to young people.
Johar, everyone. I would take this moment to honor our elders. Joanne is here, Ruka is here. And I want to take this moment to remember all our leaders who have, because of the leadership, we are here. And I'm really grateful, and I say this on behalf of young people. Thank you for everything you have done. We are here because of you. And I join in and also thank all our allies here, especially the Skoll Foundation. Because of Skoll, we also have the Youth Climate Justice Fund delegation here joining us with Skoll support. So to all the young people here, let's give a huge round of applause. So coming in, I would like to share about the work which we are doing, but also would like to focus on the principles which we young people from Asia has come across, curated in our report supported by Rights and Resource Initiative. Solange is here. I would like to briefly share that because I think when we are talking about how are we preparing for COP30, those principles are extremely important, and we have 5 principles which talks about first is youth leadership is intergenerational, and we need intergenerational support in leading up and preparing for COP30 as well. We need your support, we need your wisdom, we need your experience, and how we all can come together and work together. Second is leaders create more leaders. And that is something which I feel and I have experienced that it is because of these collective leadership and the movement we have built, we are having more young leaders in this room and in the world. So how we can have that openness of sharing leadership with young people, and that is something a very important way also to prepare to COP30. Third, I truly believe, and this is I say it with all my heart, is like youth learn by leading and allies learn by trusting them. We want you to trust us, and thank you for trusting us so far, and it is because of this trust and love that we have come long way, and this is how we are going to approach COP30 as well going forward. And the fourth is extremely important, and I want to take a moment also to remember all the young people out there. Youth safety is a shared duty, and I really want you all to see this as a very challenging and important issue of how we all can support and create a safe spaces for young people, and specifically when we are talking about COP spaces and journeying and traveling to COP. It is extremely difficult, and I don't need to go into the detail. It's like how do we create from a person, young person coming from their own village and territory to accessing those, how we can create those support system and ecosystems for those young people. And the last and the most important thing which I would like to share and like pause for my intervention is youth leadership and solidarity is sacred. It is extremely important for all of us to have that solidarity as a sacred space, and it is because of that feeling and that approach we have all come here. And that is why I feel everyone here is important, everyone here is contributing, and that is how, with that solidarity and strength, we all can take our work together, support it together stronger to COP30.
Amazing. Thank you for that, Archana. And if I could just stay with you for a moment, we've heard from each one of you around the preparation and the priorities ahead of COP. And then there is a lot that happens during COP, both in the formal spaces, outside of the formal spaces, on the sidelines, and out on the streets, right? And movements and communities are in all of those spaces. And would love to start with you, Archana, if we could hear a little bit more about what are the priorities for youth during COP, right? Priorities around policy recommendations, climate targets, or whatever it may be. What are the priorities for you all in this moment for the communities you work with?
I have 3 priorities at the moment, and I say this in resonating what the young people have been saying. We have been talking about climate finance, and it is still known that that is still a struggle when we are talking about Indigenous people and young people in general. And having said that, if I also talk about climate philanthropy, we did a study where we found out of the 2% of the climate philanthropy support, only 0.7%, 7.6% goes to young people. And that too, when we see it on a very microscopic lens, it goes only mostly to the global south, global north and not global south, which I feel is extremely difficult when we are talking in terms of how are we going to access spaces like COP, because there is lack of funding. So my priority as we go forward in the COP is also like, how do we have support to go to the COP, but also how do we have those advocacy to have more direct support to Indigenous peoples and young people. The second priority I have is when we are also talking about the loss and damage support, which we all have been talking about, I feel it's extremely important to have Indigenous leadership and young people leadership in the loss and damage conversations and accessing those spaces. Apart from that, I truly feel, and I would like to give a little sharing an anecdote here of my experience. When I was part of the UN Secretary General's Youth Advisory Group on Climate Change, we were trying and struggling to have more young people accessing COP. And I had reached out to one of the supporters and funding mechanisms. It's like, can we have this young people join in? And the question they asked me is like this: we cannot find this person online. There's no reference of this person in the website. So how do we know that this person is credible? And that took me back and made me question myself a lot. It's like we are still in that arena where we are only willing to support people if they are visible. And I think that's a major challenge, I feel, and that is something which I want to link in terms of COP30 as a priority. Is like a lot of young people, a lot of Indigenous people are working in the front lines who might not be visible as per your criteria, but who are there defending the communities and territories. How can we make sure that their leadership is the center of decision making when it comes to climate policies?
Thank you for that. Yes. Yes. And Nonette, you just mentioned earlier, this COP will have the greatest number of Indigenous representation. We would love to hear from you around priorities during the COP.
Yeah, so I think it's important for us to acknowledge already that the priority has been set by the Indigenous peoples themselves, the visibility. And especially for Brazil, this is to advance the formalization of land rights. Without land rights for the forest guardians, it will be very hard to achieve the targets for climate. And that's so important. So the visibility is one, and that's very important. And the second is, as mentioned, climate finance. There has been momentum, and this has been very, very, very clear from the pledge in 2021, and 25 years later, that's 2025, it's going to be renewed. So pledge in 2021 was 1.7 billion. The review has been such that it has almost been met. It has been met. In fact, a big percentage went directly and then indirectly to indigenous peoples. I am in the mindset of abundance. So I would say deep gratitude for the increase of percentages, and then we can still increase that. So the way I would speak about it is from the mindset of abundance. Let's just get more of that direct, right? And so the target for 2025 now is the renewal of that pledge. And that is a priority. Everyone here have spoken about this. The Path to Scale is speaking about this. There are two big government coalitions that are speaking about this, allies that are funders for indigenous peoples and forests. The Forest Climate Leadership Partnership, FCLP, is very proactive in getting governments to come from the north to the south forward and express their commitment to expand forests by recognizing land rights. So that's one. And the second is the Forest Tenure Funders Group that had been monitoring the first pledge and trying to get others to come to the second pledge. And it's very important that this is actually a pledge for everyone and especially for indigenous peoples. And that's a very important message that we need to really get across to all of us who are supporters of indigenous peoples. I think finally it really is the importance of getting the Amazon Basin regional platforms also showing up. Yeah.
Yes, thank you for that. And with that spirit of abundance, Daniela.
Well, I think during COP will be really interesting. As Nonette has said, we expect the largest ever in the history of COPs delegation of indigenous peoples, including from the Amazon, of course. But Brazil is really mobilized. I'm saying interesting because I'm really curious to see how everything will go down during the event. Civil society is organizing, the youth movement is organizing to be at Belém. And I think it's important for everyone to know that even though the COP will happen in the Amazon rainforest, it will happen in a big city. Belém is one of the biggest cities in the country. We're not talking about a conference that will happen inside the forest. And sometimes they can have this impression, but that's not what's going to happen. Like, even our president said that we're going to have the meetings with the trees. That's not happening. It's air conditioning and places But outside the conference, I think it's going to be really interesting. We expect to have the larger march that we've been having that we did not have in the last years in non-democratic countries. And I think Brazilian civil society will show up to show the world leaders that the Amazon is watching the conference and the negotiations. And I think that it's important to remember that even though at one hand, we say that the people who live in the forest, especially indigenous communities, are the most responsible to keep these forests standing. And they are also the most affected by climate change. They are not only the responsible to keep us alive, but also once the world gets hotter, it's their lives who are most impacted. We're talking about communities that are only reachable by boats, for instance. And when we have extreme droughts, as we had last year and the year before in Brazil, whole communities cannot leave their homes, go to school, reach hospitals, reach their jobs. Food doesn't get in, water doesn't get in. So we're talking about extreme conditions. And it's really unfair when we think that they are the people who are contributing the most to fight climate change, and they're also the ones most affected by the effects of climate change. So showing the world leaders that the Amazon is watching is crucial, because we know that we need the world support to keep the Amazon standing. And when we say that we need the world support, it's not that we need intervention in Brazil, it's not that. It's that we need to support the people who are in the forest and keep the forest standing. As Nonette said, we need to fund these groups. We need to make the money reach the ones who are in the front lines and who are not stepping out of this fight. No matter what geopolitical conditions are changing, they are keeping their ground, and they're doing it for all of us and for all of our future. So in Amazônia de Pé, we are seizing the opportunity to be on the streets with our volunteers. We have more than 20,000 volunteers all over the country. A lot of them are going to Belém, and with our partners also. But we are also calling out the other countries. We are going to call out our Brazilian government to protect and to designate all the public forests. But we are also calling out the other countries to support Brazil in this mission. So if we designate this public forest to indigenous communities, to quilombolas communities, what is the funding that we have to keep this forest protected afterwards, after the designation. So we are endorsing a proposition from the Brazilian government, which is called the Tropical Forest Fund Facility, TFFF. And we are closely examining how these funds will be distributed to the peoples that live in the forest. And we are calling the responsibility from the world leaders of the other countries to support this initiative and fund the ones who are, with their lives, most of time with risks, as Mike has said, protecting the forest and keeping it alive.
Thank you. And Mike, welcome.
Yeah, just to expand a little on Daniela's point about calling out and taking it in a slightly different direction. One of the things which we see at the COP summits in general, and particularly the last three, is the need to, alongside those efforts to build the power and make space for the voices of Indigenous and grassroots communities, is work quite deliberately to dismantle the power of the fossil fuel lobby, which is doing everything they can to obstruct meaningful climate action at the COP summits. We've had 29 now and still no clear call for a fossil fuel phase out. One thing which we and a group of partners called Kick Big Polluters Out have done for the past few years is try to flush out how many fossil fuel lobbyists turn up at the COP summits. In Azerbaijan, COP29, it was 1,773, and a lot of them were actually brought in under the auspices of government delegations. So some of them would quite literally have been in a position to have a hold on the pen, while at the same time environmental defenders, Indigenous communities, grassroots communities have no presence in those rooms where the decisions are made. This does extend to governments as well. We found that UAE, during its presidency, tried to broker new oil and gas deals worth around $100 billion. So they actually sought to use the COP presidency as a shop window for more fossil fuels. And because of that, we wondered why Azerbaijan wanted to be the COP president, and we wondered if they might follow the same playbook. So to test this theory, we set up a fake company, which purported to be a sort of investor in oil and gas, and approached the Azerbaijan COP presidency team, and actually very quickly got through to the COP presidency CEO, the deputy energy minister, a man called Elnur Sultanov. And we approached Mr. Sultanov, and we said that we could perhaps help a bit with the sponsorship of COP. These summits are pretty expensive after all. But in return, we would like to have access to some people who could help us get new deals on Azerbaijan oil and gas. And he was really very helpful and said, well, look, if you guys come to COP29 on the sidelines of these talks about addressing climate breakdown, I can introduce you to some senior representatives of SOCAR, the legendarily corrupt Azerbaijan state oil company. Unfortunately for him, we filmed this encounter and we gave it to the BBC, and they made a big splash with it. We got about 13 million downloads very quickly. And then a couple of days later, the parliamentary committee in Azerbaijan, this is the day before I was traveling to Baku, issued a statement accusing us of something I hadn't heard of before called a hybrid attack on Azerbaijan. And a couple of days after that, we had this unhinged speech from the president of Azerbaijan, sort of railing against civil society and calling oil and gas a gift from the gods. And this rather flushed the problem out into the open, which could have been a negative, but there was a really positive response from an array of climate leaders, including some who are part of the Skoll World Forum, like Mary Robinson, Cristiano Figueres, which was to issue an open call for COP reform. And so this rather unpleasant flip side to what we're talking about here of dismantling toxic power continues to be a theme. We have high hopes that these sorts of things won't occur in Brazil, but the Brazilian government wants to expand oil and gas extraction, and so it's another piece of the puzzle which we'll probably all want to pay attention to free up that space that we want to help create for those that need to be heard.
Amazing. And this is the power of movement organizing, right? The insider-outsider strategy, bringing in people in and pushing some people out of these spaces, as we've heard today. And I think part of the bringing people in has been bringing the right people, right? Indigenous leadership, youth leadership, women, movements, and so forth, and making sure that our communities carry the work forward beyond the COP space and outside of the COP space. And if we can just take a moment to talk about that, right? What are your hopes, and what what are you working on in terms of making sure what happens during COP30, the commitments are accountable, the actors are accountable, and how do we make sure that whatever unfolds in that space goes back to communities, goes back to where it belongs, and we're able to carry the work forward beyond that space in the next year or the next decade, as Brittany was saying. Maybe we'll start with you, Mike, and then just go down.
Yeah, just a couple of reflections. So I mentioned earlier this nascent initiative on protection of land and environmental defenders called LEAD. We're hoping very much that we'll get a big push from the Brazil government, and then there'll be a follow-up sort of inaugural summit sometime next year, which I hope very much many of you in the room will be part of. So that's a piece of follow-up we're excited about. The other, and I was thinking about this, Archana and Nonette mentioned climate finance, is we're hoping in relation to this dismantling power piece that we can, I don't mean us as an organisation, but with many allies, make a more effective case for taxation on large fossil fuel companies to contribute to funds for loss and damage. It seems that in the policy discussion there may be an emerging opportunity for that, and that's something we'd really like to see followed up.
Me too. I think that, once again, grassroots movements are crucial in the post-COP. I think that it's their roles to bring the discussions into the territories and make people understand what the climate negotiations impact their lives. It's a big gap between daily lives of people and what's being discussed in the conference. So grassroots movements have also the responsibility to bring the subjects to the communities, to the schools, to the universities, the indigenous communities, and talk about how these negotiations impact our daily lives. But also, I think that the grassroots movements are the responsibles, the ones that can hold governments accountable in their commitments. Because we know that commitments are made in the conference, but not always they are followed in the countries. So grassroots movements can hold these governments accountable with public manifestations and mobilizations, and with inclusively using litigation, as the youth climate movement has done in Brazil and has sued our former president that has not keep up with the commitments that the Brazilian government has made, the climate commitments. So we have different strategies, but I think that the movements are crucial to make this agenda happen and get outside of the negotiation and become effectively public policies.
Yes, after COP, what's important is to keep the voice of the influencers, and these are really the large social movements, the large indigenous peoples movements nationally, because that's where they're most, they can push for accountability for all of the nationally determined contributions that are pledged using the UNFCCC, and combining that with the biodiversity pledge. It's a very important follow-up monitoring action. And for the ones on the land and the territories, expanding and continuing to map and expand the listing, registration, and recognition of those land rights. Just on the Tenure Facility, in 2024, we had basically supported all of the indigenous expansion of land rights recognition up to more than 50% of last year. And this is because of the money from the pledge. Yeah? Without this, the expansion would not have happened. We only take 10% of that. Everything goes to the indigenous peoples' movements and the ones that are in territory, guarding the integrity of the territory by mapping and having those registered. Up to 4.5 million hectares, advanced double from 2023, and advancing that to 33 million hectares all over the tropical rainforest areas. And this is still small. We all know the target is big. Yeah, so there's so much that the indigenous peoples on their own, without even the funding, are contributing. And this continues post-pledge, and then on to the next pledge, and on to the next pledge. It doesn't even matter. As Joanne was saying, you give us money or you don't give us money, we continue this work. And it is it's a constant element that we need to acknowledge despite the pledge. Yeah.
I think what is important to also see that we don't want young people to be in spaces like COP, just to be in numbers. We want meaningful participation and engagement. And when I say this, I would also like to emphasize that if we see there are civil society organization or there are groups who have dedicated members focusing and following international negotiations and COPs. But it is very sad that young people are doing all of these in a voluntary capacity. So we need more support and acceptance even in the funding landscape, that young people are supported throughout the year to follow the COP processes and negotiation, which will help them prep for the COP, go into the COP, and post-COP engagements also. Otherwise, just supporting young people to go into the COP processes, then it is not a holistic approach. And that is something which I feel like what is the youth perspective on that particular laws and policies is also extremely important, which I feel like once the COP is done, once the final decision has come out, what does this decision means to me from India, from indigenous perspective, or from different localities and different regions across the globe? Because what I feel that there is always a predominant narrative which is above all the narrative. And I feel we need to have counter narratives. We need to have multiple and diverse narratives when we are also talking about what does this COP decision means to me. And the other thing which I also feel that it is extremely important for us to also see and understand, sometimes when we are in the national level, we see, oh, this is a new policy which is being introduced, or this is a new law which is being introduced. Only after a dedicated reflection and analysis, we know that this policy is coming because of this international commitment. And that is something which is extremely important for us to be in COP, understand that, and come back to our communities and in the national level to check those policies, to hold the policy makers accountable. And that is what I feel. It's a huge work post-COP and leading up to COP and be in the COP. So it's a vicious circle which needs support and attention, and just focusing on one part would be not a holistic approach.
Absolutely, and I think you very nicely eased us into my next question, which is also an opportunity for me to tell you, I'm going to come to you for your questions after that. So if you have any questions that have come up, please think about it, write it down, and we'll come to you right after this round, which is, you've helped us identify some key priorities for this COP, right? Whether it's public forest protection and fund, renewal of indigenous land right commitments, climate financing, or the recognition and protection of environmental and land defenders, they are priorities, right? So then and we're in a room full of people here, a room full of doers, a room full of allies, as well as the entire school forum space is comprised of folks in philanthropy and media and government that have a stake in these conversations and an influence in these conversations. So I wonder if you can close us out for this round with just some of your thoughts, our call to action. What do you want people to do? What do we need to think about and support? And we'll just go around, if that's easier.
Yeah, sure. So I suspect that there are a lot of doers in this room, but I'm just going to address the point to what I understand to be the sort of overall makeup of Skoll World Forum participants. So philanthropists and funders, yeah, please provide the kind of support which my fellow panelists have talked about being urgently needed for indigenous grassroots groups, land and environmental defenders. That's an absolute priority and can be done well ahead of COP30. For anybody in governments, please engage on this LEAD process, the Leaders Network on Environmental Activists and Defenders. Add your government's name to the 11 that we have so far. And also thinking about media and storytellers, yeah, please engage and invest your time ahead of COP and during and afterwards in terms of amplifying the stories that we've been hearing about here, because one of the things we've noticed in the past few COPs is actually the mainstream media has been disengaging somewhat from the process. And so there is a big opportunity and a need with COP30 to step that up again.
Well, not to be repetitive, but I think that the best way to influence right now is to support grassroots movements. I've been telling a lot that we have the science, we have the data. It's not like we don't have the information that points us the way, but we need to create the political conditions for the public policies to be implemented. So this is only made by creating political power. And for me and for Amazônia de Pé, the key is the grassroots movements that can create the political conditions in their own countries. So supporting grassroots movements, supporting indigenous movements, youth-led movements that usually work without any funding and they keep standing, it's crucial. As Nonette has said, like, the indigenous movements in Brazil have been resisting for 500 years and without any support. And they are the only reason why we still have the Amazon standing. So it's our collective responsibility to fund the groups that are taking the bullet for all of us.
Mine is just to remember that there's so many other basins that we are looking at. So there's the Congo Basin, there's the Asia Basin, and many others out there in Australia and others. It's important for us to know that we are together looking at this opportunity, and it's important to have that confidence. The people who have protected these forests have been there and have stood up and protected. That's why we're still breathing some good air. Our knowledge, our lessons in the Tenure Facility is that, of course, you can trust. Of course, you can put the big money. Of course, you can. And we can do it. And the allies, of course, they have a role. So it's not an, exclusive, we're all diverse, we have a role. So trust and be confident, and yes, we can do this.
I would like to break down into small parts. We need accreditations to participate in COP30. Young people are working in informal groups, not formalized groups or institutions who do not have accreditation, which we get, but a lot of you all have accreditations. So when young people come to you asking for accreditations, we would really request you all to be open. But I also feel to be in a journey where you're working with young people all throughout the year. So when this accreditation opportunity comes, you share with them, but also being open to not only limited to your group. So we need accreditation. We need support, not only in terms of travel, food and accommodation, but also specifically seeing how we can work around visa justice, because it is a huge challenge. And even if you give money for visa, sometimes it doesn't work. So that connection, that letters are extremely important. So I would really request you all and seek your help and considerations on that. And at the same time, I would also like to think and see that how we all can work in a collaborative way. And I would like to propose, and which we all have been doing, but again, we need you and we need your support, intergenerational learning spaces where we support each other, build a capacity, because I know whom I have to go when I need to learn about carbon market or climate finance. So can we have that ecosystem when the young people can come to you and ask your guidance and help? So building more spaces like this is something which I feel is extremely important. I would like to wrap up and share, which I have been saying for over the years, but I truly believe in that. It's like young people and indigenous people should be leaders of climate action and not victims of climate policies.
Thank you all for those brilliant words. And I'm sure there's some questions and reflections from the audience. So we'd love to come to you now. Amazing. Maybe let's see who has a question. Let's raise hands and maybe we can take a few at a time. Okay, Amalia, 2, 3. We've got folks, amazing folks in the audience with the mic. Amazing. Yeah.
Thank you. So my name is Amalia Souza, and I founded a Brazilian social environmental fund 20 years ago this year. I wanted to maybe just fill a few gaps that I noticed, because I think that the picture's a lot bigger. Of course, I'm from Brazil, and we've been doing this work to actually get funding to groups, right? In numbers, can only be done in local currency from inside the country, period. I mean, you can make grants, great grants, to bigger organizations, to big movements, organized movements that can handle relationships with outside organizations and dollars and euros and pounds in their accounts. But the real people on the ground don't have accounts, cannot get out of the forest where they're hiding for their lives to get cash in a bank, in a hostile environment, because everything there is hostile to them. So I think that there's a picture that that's a very important piece of this conversation that that can't be left outside. We are a fund that makes around 600 grants a year. We've made almost 5,000 grants in 10 countries in the last 20 years. The whole thing here is about scale. And scaling to reach the number of communities needs to be done internally. And so Casa Fund is one of 20 Brazilian funds. Also 20 years and more, human rights funds, women's funds, racial equity funds. We actually have been building infrastructure for local philanthropy. But the thing is, and one of the reasons that we bring a lot of groups, we were taking them to the COPs far away, but of course this time we're just going to be able to support more. There's going to be over 30,000 civil society people at this COP. I don't think you have any idea what you're expecting. If you've been in Brazil in one of the World Social Forums in the past, 20 years ago, Brazil, there's a lot of suffering, but there's so much celebration and dance and ritual that this is going to be. I think that in fact this COPs might, in terms of the energy that it throws into the planet, and it could be a huge shift, because there's definitely, there's a lot of things we're fighting inside, including that Brazil is a oil country. That's our biggest income there, that's why the push is so huge. So there's a lot of really big struggles, and there's a lot of money missing on the ground. And I think that one of the conversations is actually, where is climate finance going, and why does it stay always in the majority in the hands of global north institutions to come to our countries, try to solve our problems for us, when the money should be coming into the structures that already exist. It's a very sophisticated, Brazil is, the other countries are. We even have a global alliance, a global South alliance of funds that are funding in 50 countries. So we've been building local infrastructure, but we continue to be invisible to the real big, there's money out there, you're right. There's a lot of money. We don't have to be short-sighted about this, but why is it not landing inside, where the real change can be made, is one of the biggest questions. So just to invite you, in finishing, we're going to have at this COP, we have secured a really great venue and events place, and we're going to call it the Global South House. And it's going to be to talk about climate finance, North and South. And so we're going to curate some conversations, but we're also inviting everybody who is involved with philanthropy, with climate philanthropy, with Global South philanthropy, to come and join us and offer, we need to talk and we need to make this work. We don't have any time anymore. And the only people who are going to protect these places are these people. And these people don't know you exist. They don't even know, a lot of them know we exist, but not everybody. And we need to find them. So it has to be a local thing. And a local connected to the global. Yeah. So we're going to have actually make the shift.
Thank you so much. And I also recognize this is a room full of people with deep experience, and we could talk for hours and really strategize really well together, because we need to, right? And we only have 18 more minutes left. And so I just want to make sure we move through the questions and just know that we do want to hear from everyone. So we have 2 more questions, and then we'll come back to our panelists. I should have worn my glasses today, because now I can't see to the back of the room. Yeah, I was like, why did I forget it?
Thank you very much, and thanks to the panelists. I'm God Raymond Ryoka from Africa Climate and Health Alliance. We bring health in the climate negotiations. You are talking about involving grassroots and indigenous groups, but not talking about their health. So our work is ensuring we bring health in climate negotiations, the financing models, and ensuring countries develop health maps for climate resilience. I have one question which I think is very important to discuss. Before we talk about road to COP30, we need to look at how did COP29 happen? before we look at road to COP30, we need to fast track COP29. I was happy to be in Azerbaijan, and COP29 was one of the COP with the least women climate negotiators, only 15%, fronted by the government to go and negotiate on climate issues. And averagely, we have 25% climate negotiation for the last 5 COPs. So where are the voices of women and girls who are most affected by climate change? It is imperative to talk about climate justice in the space of climate negotiations. So my question to the panel is, how do we ensure we amplify voices of women and girls in the next COP30? Yes. We should change the trajectory of COP29. 15% is quite low. Yes. We need to see 30% and above in the participation of women. But most importantly, how can we ensure that we have health on the climate agenda? The Baku Unity Pact that talked about money is the global north prioritizing addressing concerns of climate, and the challenge we're going to take COP30. We have a huge backlog, COP29. So what are we going to do to ensure that women's voices are amplified at COP30? Yes. But also, how are we going to prioritize health in negotiations at the COP process? Thank you.
Thank you for that. We can take one more question. So we've got, let's take the 3 questions, and then we'll just wrap up with that. Yeah, here, there. Right here, right. I'm like, wait.
Hi, everyone. I'm Diego Casas, Skoll 2025 Fellow and Program Director at CCG, which is a philanthropic collaboration on climate. I'm also from Brazil, and one of the things that I'm seeing a lot is just the lack of political imagination in the country right now to stretch the limits of what's possible. So I keep saying that, for me, COP30 is a portal into the future. So my question to you is, in your wildest dreams, what do you think we can actually do in COP30 that will unlock the next 30 to 50 years of collaboration to really get us out of this mess? Because it's really a mess. Yes. So how can we stretch the limits of the political imagination to do the impossible? Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you for that. And I think we had one last hand up, and then over there.
Hi, thank you. Oops. My name is Françoise Mouté. I'm with the African Women's Development Fund and the Skoll Fellow from last year. I wanted to ask specifically, because there's so many connections between like climate, for where I stand, climate and gender. We just spoke about climate and health. Strategically and tactically, what can we do, to make those connections clear and really not just make a case, but actually get some action and results on making those connections? Because the silos don't work, we know that. But I'm not sure there's room in COP30 for the connection. So what can we do before, during, and after?
Amazing. All right, I know there are more questions, and I wish we could take all of them now, but let's answer the first rounds of questions, and then we'll wrap up. And this is just the beginning of the conversation. So hopefully we'll talk as we walk out and during the rest of our time here together at Skoll. So we have a point and a reflection about the way climate financing flows and local infrastructure for funding mechanisms, if you have any thoughts on that, the point that Amalia was making. We have an important question about amplifying the voices of women and girls, and also health and climate, which connects to the question around making stronger links between gender, health, and climate. How do we do that better? And it would be great to wrap up with the question about what are your wildest dreams about what is possible. Who wants to take up any of those questions? And we'll close with the wildest dreams. Let's go. No, we'll finish with the wildest dreams. We'll wrap up.
Everybody will talk about the wildest dreams.
Everybody will answer the wildest dreams.
I can talk about Amalia's question. It's not. It's to reinforce actually what Amalia brought. I think that at Fundo Casa, we haven't. Amazônia de Pé is not funded by Fundo Casa, but many of our partners are, which are smaller than us, are grassroots organizations, local organizations. We are always sharing with them the opportunities of Fundo Casa. And I think that it's really important to we've always been hearing about the climate finance and big numbers that are happening across the world, and youth movements in Brazil, I'm talking about my reality, we are always looking at each other and saying, where is this money? Like, where is it being distributed? And I think that local funds play a major role in this ecosystem and need to be more supported. Amazônia de Pé, for instance, is not a philanthropy. We are a grassroots movement, but in 2022, 2023, and 2024, we have re-granted almost 2 million reais, which for us is a lot because it's a major part of our funding. And we understood that if we didn't do that, the youth groups that we have funded would never access funding because they don't have the structure to do it. Many of them don't speak English. They are not in these kinds of rooms, and it's re-granting small amount of money. It's like 20,000 reais can make a real difference in a small group. 50,000 reais, which is $10,000, can do miracles in a group. And in a big NGO, it would do nothing. So how this money also multiplies in the hands of these people? It's less money, do more powerful stuff. So it's really important to support local re-granters so that we can access this funding, and youth groups can access this funding, indigenous groups, quilombolas groups, and more.
Amazing. Thank you for that. Nonette?
Yeah, I think on the structure for grant distribution, that's a very important role and part of Amalia's earlier network on this. The Tenure Facility's experience right now is there's a huge call for indigenous peoples to get direct funds. So we're 2/3, almost now 80% of our funds go directly to indigenous peoples organizations. And I would just like to emphasize here, the money that is, even for us, large amounts, so $1 million a year, just imagine that we're committing it for 5 years. Our realization is probably the counterpart of indigenous peoples in doing this is triple that every year. And we're not counting that, but it's really important to count that because it's quiet, it's silent, it's labor, it's like hundreds and thousands of effort of indigenous peoples. And there was actually people who were saying, you have to count that because that's the counterpart. So just on the flow, it has to flow. We're creating, and here are all the models. There's several models that are emerging for all the funds to flow. Yeah, in the DRC, we put the funds in a bag, or we put it through, there's all sorts of different creative ways because there are no banks in the interiors, right, for all of this. So leave it to the system that is actually operating. Let's just try to be open to make it all flow. We're still learning and we're still trying to be really open about this. My wildest dreams is that we would all be supported by the generative efforts of the indigenous peoples when they actually have their own funds and they're generating it themselves and they have the financial instruments, and we'll all just be service providers and service units for them.
Perfect. Thank you. I think Nonette has said it, so I would take it from what Nonette has said is, yes, there is a lot of fund commitment and allocations, but there is barely any effort in understanding the perspective of what the infrastructure is on ground to be able to receive those funds, whether it is small grants and or bigger grants. Often there is only like bigger grants, we don't do small grants, or there is small grants, but even to receive that there is no support system. And I feel that is extremely important, which as part of RRI, the Gender Justice Program, the women had come together and they had also curated a manifesto. Is like, how do we ensure direct access to finance for indigenous women and young women also. So I feel those reflection and undoing of those infrastructures or making changes, whether it is in terms of climate finance or philanthropies, is extremely important to be able to receive it. As part of the Youth Climate Justice Fund also, we have been engaging in participative re-granting mechanism, which I feel is extremely important as it is a youth-led process, which one thing which we have seen that when young people are involved in that level of decision-making processes, we are being able to make sure that the fund allocation are being able to reach to the communities on ground, which again we need more inclusivity in the grant making processes. I also feel that the intersectionality, I would also like to bring in the element of mental health, which I feel has not been touched upon in this conversation. It's like how much it has impact, whether it is going to COP or coming after COP. It's like, what can I do more? What can I do more? And it just makes people very difficult, and that intersectionality has to be weaved into all our decision making processes and work. My wildest dream is I hope people work with respect and love and solidarity, and just see the thing what it is, and not try to pretend about that climate crisis is not happening now.
Absolutely, absolutely. And if we could hear from, that question around how do we uplift the voices of women and girls in these spaces, and any other thoughts on the connections between health and climate. But we haven't heard from you, Daniel, Mike.
Yeah, sure. So on that point, I was at COP29. I wasn't aware it was only 15% of negotiators for governments who were women, which is pretty scandalous. I hadn't thought about that before, but I suppose within our various means, there's something which we all need to think about ahead of COP30 in terms of holding our own governments to account in that regard. Reflecting on things which we as an organisation can contribute. I mentioned earlier we do this reporting on threats and attacks against land and environmental defenders. We need to work harder, I think, at sort of bringing out the array of gender-based threats and forms of violence and marginalisation that women face, which are not captured and reflected in the headline statistics, and bring those out more thoughtfully. And then I guess as organisations, how we show up. I'm a white, middle-aged northern man, and I lead a northern organisation, and we have our part to play too in terms of thinking about how we represent the contribution that we can make.
I'm going to just a comment around the connections between climate and other subjects as health and gender. The year after COP, we're going to host presidential elections in Brazil in 2026. So we have 2 years of really intense political scenario in the country. And our public polls have shown that climate is not a priority for the population. When we ask them, like, what is your priority for choosing the next president, for instance, climate is never a priority. And one of the keys that we've been talking about in Brazil is how can we connect climate to the issues that are important to people's lives. Like health is important. So how can we connect climate and health? Housing is important. How can we connect climate and housing? The future, food is important. It's crucial. How can we connect climate and food? The future of our kids is important. How can we connect climate and maternity and paternity? And I think this is key, because if climate keeps being this like thing that it's above all of us, it doesn't really connect with our lives. And we know, in this room, we all know that it's really connected. So how can we make a narrative change so that people understand the connections of what is important? This is a mic. I thought it was only recording. What is important to them with climate? I think this is crucial. And about the question that Diego asked, we were talking about this yesterday. I think that this is a challenge for Brazil, but I think this is a challenge in the whole world. Like, what is the future that we are aspiring to? What is our vision, our positive vision for this future? And I think that in times of uncertainty and geopolitical crazy in the geopolitical scenario, I think that Brazil can play a critical role in this COP, because as Amalia has said, we are a country vibrant with a cultural life that is really strong, and see the connection between culture and climate. I think this COP30 can really make people understand the connection of these two huge subjects. And my wildest dream from Amazônia de Pé is that we'll reach COP30 with at least, from the 57 million hectares of undesignated public lands, with at least 30 million already starting the process of designation. It's not really wild, because 15 million we have already started since we launched the movement. So it's like double it until November. But it's the year where we can seize this opportunity and try to raise Brazil's ambition in this policy. So I hope that this is what we'll be able to show the world, and ask the world to help us keep this forest protected also.
And Mike, I don't think we've heard your wildest dream.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's wild enough, but I mean, we're sort of we're working in this context where. Yes, no more fossil fuel lobbyists. Thank you, Joanne. And no more autocratic petrostates hijacking COPs and using it as shop window for more oil and gas deals. I was thinking, though, about something a bit more abstract. I mean, what we're all contending with is that multilateral action on climate, as on many other things that we all care about, has been on the slide for a long time. And now with the Trump presidency, it's just sort of feels at the moment a little bit like it's plunging off a cliff, because what he's up to is being emulated and used as validation by autocrats and people opposed to climate action all around the world. So a slightly abstract and maybe not very wild thought is, if enough good tangible things came out of COP30 to rebuild some of the trust, and that includes the trust that global south, global majority countries, indigenous communities and others actually have in the willingness and ability of multilateral action to deliver, perhaps that would come about through the protection of the Amazon or some wider commitment to forests. Maybe it could be through protection of land and environmental defenders, indigenous communities. Maybe something else we've not covered, which would be a global commitment reinforced on free, prior and informed consent for indigenous communities when it comes to the scramble for transition or critical minerals. I mean, those in their own way, you could say they're all too individual and fragmented, but I think one of the problems with the COPs has not been enough delivery on anything very much to keep the trust or build it. And I think we might be able to make quite a lot out of a few tangible wins at COP30 to turn that around.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know that important question around intersections, right? How are we connecting climate to food, to health? What we do know is communities make those connections in their work, right? They connect them every single day, right? They understand how reproductive health is connected to kind of indigenous rights, to women's leadership, right? To conservation, right? They make all those connections. And in many ways, the gap is on the higher level, right? How do we uplift those connections in decision-making spaces and in the spaces that matter? And it's not necessarily my wildest dream, but I would say my foundational hope is in this critical moment that we continue to see that over the course of history, the metric of history shows us communities and movements have always been our most enduring mechanism for transformation in society. They are the reason why change happens, and they will be the reason why we will continue to sustain change despite the challenges we face. So thank you so much for joining this session. We're ending right on time. Thank you to each and every one of you for your deep engagement, listening, and questions. And can we give a round of love and applause to our amazing panelists for their wisdom, for their insights, and for their necessary leadership in this moment. May our conversation continue for the rest of the week.